All right, let's dive right into this. What you are about to hear is the anatomy of a complete and utter financial disaster. We're looking at one of the most brutal market crashes in recent history. We're talking about how South Korea's massive AI stock bubble just violently burst, leaving absolutely unprecedented devastation in its wake. Throughout this explainer, we're going to decode exactly how an entire nation's market was brought to its knees by a lethal mix of tech hype, terrifying financial leverage, and a massive regulatory oversight.
$2 trillion. That is the jaw-dropping amount of market value wiped out from the South Korean market almost overnight. To put that into perspective for you, the destruction of wealth was so fast and so incredibly severe that everyday citizens literally lost everything they owned. It got so desperate that the South Korean government was actually forced to open emergency suicide helplines just to prevent a massive loss of life.
And here's the thing, you almost never see this in global finance. The South Korean finance minister actually came out and issued a very public, very direct apology on behalf of the entire country. He flat out admitted that rolling out specific financial products was a massive mistake. Now, to understand what those toxic products were and why the government is taking the heat, we've got to look at how this crazy bubble inflated in the first place.
The sheer scale of this breakout was just mind-boggling. Look at this timeline. For 14 long years, from 2011 all the way to 2023, the Kospi, which is South Korea's main stock index, was effectively flat. It just hovered right around 2,500. And investors were seeing practically zero returns. But then, bam, the global AI boom hit. The world desperately needed memory chips to power all these huge AI data centers. And guess what? South Korea is an absolute powerhouse in that specific sector. Thanks to that massive global demand, this historically flat index just exploded. In a year and a half, it blew past 3,000, broke 5,000, and peaked at a staggering 9,000. It essentially tripled.
But as you might guess, that artificial high, fueled entirely by memory chip demand, well, it didn't last. In a matter of mere weeks, the market suffered a devastating 35% wipeout. At its absolute worst, it plummeted 20% in just 5 continuous trading days. This wasn't just big institutional money evaporating, okay? This was an absolute bloodbath that completely wiped out the life savings of everyday retail investors who thought they were finally getting their once-in-a-lifetime bull run.
Section 1. The deadly 10x leverage chain.
To really grasp this crash, we've got to humanize the devastating math of financial leverage. Let's look at a university student named Lee Sang-ho. Lee wanted in on the AI boom, right? But he didn't have the cash, so he stacked his risk in 3 insane layers. First, he pledged his apartment to a bank to get a loan of about 10 lakh rupees. Okay, that's layer 1. Step 2, he took that borrowed money to a broker who gave him 5x margin. Boom. His 10 lakhs is now 50 lakhs of buying power. But he didn't stop there. In step 3, he took that 50 lakhs and dumped it into a 2x single-stock leveraged ETF. So suddenly, a borrowed 10 lakh rupee foundation was supporting a massive 1 crore rupee market exposure.
Now, this kind of setup is quite literally a ticking time bomb waiting for a margin call. With 10 times leverage, the math gets terrifying fast. Think about it. A mere 10% drop in the stock price equates to a 10 lakh rupee loss. That instantly evaporates 100% of his foundational investment, which basically gives the broker the green light to forcefully liquidate absolutely everything.
And here is the absolute gut punch. The underlying stock, in this case we're talking about massive companies like Samsung, it didn't just drop 10%. It plummeted a staggering 34%. Brokers just started automatically triggering margin calls left and right, and when retail investors like Lee couldn't magically deposit more cash, their positions were auto-sold. Lee didn't just lose some profits, he lost his home and 25 years of family savings in just a few days.
Section 2. The concentration time bomb.
Okay, so the second catastrophic mistake wasn't just the crazy leverage, it was market fragility. Get this, just 2 AI-driven memory chip companies, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, held over 50% of the total weight in the entire KOSP index. The whole market had effectively become a house of cards, resting on just 2 massive pillars. If those 2 tech giants even sneezed, the entire index was going to catch pneumonia and crash right along with them.
And man, they were flying dangerously high. SK Hynix, which makes the critical DRAM and high bandwidth memory for these AI data centers, saw its year-over-year revenue surge by an unbelievable 257%. The government completely knew that the entire index depended on these massively inflated, hyper-concentrated AI stocks. Yet despite knowing this extreme vulnerability, policymakers still allowed the introduction of those highly dangerous 2x single-stock leverage ETFs right at the very top of the market in May 2026. They essentially handed retail investors a matchbook while they were standing neck-deep in a powder keg.
To really see how abnormal this is, let's contrast South Korea's flawed setup with India's Nifty 50. India's market is heavily diversified. The top 3 companies, HDFC, ICICI, and Reliance, make up only about 25 to 27% of the index. The remaining 73%, that's spread out across 47 other companies. This brilliantly illustrates why a crisis in just a few top Indian companies wouldn't single-handedly destroy the entire market, the way it just did in South Korea.
Section 3. Why other markets survived.
Look, the AI bubble is obviously a global phenomenon, right? So why didn't this kind of volatility cause mass bankruptcies in other countries? Well, let's look at Taiwan. They also have massive concentration. Their semiconductor giant, TSMC, holds roughly 44% weight in their index, and hey, it also dropped about 10% recently. But you didn't hear about mass retail bankruptcies in Taiwan. Why? Because they wisely banned single-stock leveraged ETFs. Japan's Nikkei is also highly diversified and similarly bans these extreme leveraged products. South Korea was the absolute outlier here. They combined a hyper-concentrated market with government-approved hyper-leveraged retail products, a recipe for disaster.
And of course, we really can't talk about AI without mentioning the US context. Over there, the Magnificent Seven tech giants now command about 34% of the S&P 500. Since 2023, these top companies have poured a staggering $1.1 trillion into AI infrastructure. We're talking data centers, GPUs, networking, the whole shebang. Now, while this hasn't triggered a localized retail wipeout like we saw in Korea, this massive concentration and intense capital expenditure are definitely generating some serious long-term bubble fears globally.
Section 4. SEBI Safeguards and Indian Lessons.
So what does this catastrophic Asian market collapse actually mean for India? Well, it highlights a pretty stark contrast in regulatory philosophies. While South Korea opted for reckless ETF rollouts, basically maximizing retail exposure so everyone could ride the hype wave, India, through SEBI, takes a notoriously conservative approach. SEBI strictly blocks these extreme, single-stock, leveraged products. Now sure, some traders complain that SEBI limits their fast money-making opportunities, but this approach effectively acts as a blast shield. It protects Indian retail investors from exactly the type of extreme leverage crisis that just devastated Seoul.
However, we definitely aren't entirely immune to the risks of greed. Check this out. Over the last 18 months, the amount of margin provided by Indian brokers has literally tripled. That is a 3x growth in borrowed money entering the market. So, while we might not have those toxic single-stock ETFs, this rapid rise in baseline leverage is a trend that SEBI is now watching very, very closely to make sure things don't spiral completely out of control.
But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. There are some distinct silver linings for India in the wake of this crash. For one, our massive IT sector largely missed the whole AI bubble. They're just growing at a modest 2 to 3% and focusing on paying steady dividends rather than chasing hyperinflated AI promises. Because of this built-in stability, we might actually see foreign institutional investors, the FIIs, who are currently fleeing the battered Korean and Asian markets, start redirecting their capital into India. Sovereign wealth funds and global pensions are actively out there looking for safer, well-diversified, and stable alternatives right now.
Section 5. Surviving the Curse of Retailers. As we wrap up this explainer, we really need to address the psychological trap that ensnared so many people. In the market, it's known as the curse of retailers. By definition, this is the tragic phenomenon where everyday retail investors jump into a heavily rumored, hyped-up stock at its absolute all-time high. It almost always happens right as the bubble matures and the smart institutional money is quietly looking for the exit. It is driven purely by social media hype and, you guessed it, the fear of missing out. And we see this exact same behavior locally too. Just connect this to a recent Indian example. Remember the massive silver rush this past January? Telegram groups and social media feeds were just flooded with rumors of global shortages, urging absolutely everyone to buy. And so, retail investors poured in heavily right at the peak. Fast forward to today, and the hype has totally vanished, leaving those everyday investors silently holding continuous, grinding losses. So, I want to leave you with a final provocative question. Will you control your FOMO in the next market bubble, or will you let leverage control you? The absolute tragedy in South Korea proves that when you blindly follow market rumors into heavily leveraged, over-concentrated positions, you aren't investing anymore. You are quite literally gambling with your life savings. Proper risk management isn't just some boring buzzword, it is absolutely the only thing standing between you and complete financial ruin.
Thank you so much for watching this explainer. If you found this breakdown of the AI market collapse valuable and you want to truly understand the hidden forces shaping our global economy, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Subscribe to Life Tales for more in-depth, high-quality financial stories and deep dives. Stay smart, stay diversified, and I will see you in the next one.